The air in my living room, usually a comfortable space filled with the scent of lemon polish and old books, felt thick and suffocating. It was a Sunday afternoon. My son, Mark, sat stiffly on the edge of my floral armchair, his hands clasped between his knees, as if he were in a job interview. My daughter, Sarah, was perched on the sofa, clutching a throw pillow to her chest, her face a mask of practiced, sorrowful concern. They had called this a family chat, a phrase that, in my 72 years, I'd learned was a euphemism for an ambush. Mark cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. "Mom," he began, his voice dripping with the kind of strained patience one uses on a toddler or a golden retriever. "We need to talk about your finances." I kept my expression placid, my hands resting calmly in my lap, but beneath the surface, a cold dread was beginning to crystallize. I had a comfortable pension from my 35 years as a school librarian. My late husband Robert's life insurance was well invested, and my Social Security covered all the essentials. I wasn't extravagant, but if I wanted to buy a new set of expensive watercolor paints or treat my friend Eleanor to lunch at that nice downtown bistro, I did. "What about my finances, Mark?" I asked, my voice even. Sarah leaned forward, the pillow still crushed against her. "Mom, we're just worried. Mark saw your last credit card statement, the one you asked him to check because the website was acting funny." I remembered. I'd had trouble logging in and asked him for help. I hadn't realized I was handing him ammunition. There were charges from that fancy gardening store 3 times in 1 month, and that online yarn shop? Over $200? I thought of the beautiful alpaca wool I'd bought for the baby blanket I was knitting for our new grandnephew. "It's not sustainable, Mom," Mark said, taking over. He had pulled a folder from his briefcase. He was a junior partner at a consulting firm, and he treated every family problem like a corporate restructuring. "We've looked at your income and your typical expenses. Your spending is erratic." Emotional. He said the word emotional as if it were a communicable disease. The condescension was a physical thing, pressing down on my chest. They saw a frail, dotty old woman who couldn't control her impulses, a woman who needed to be managed for her own good. They didn't see a woman who had raised them, managed a household budget on a single income for years, and navigated the labyrinthine bureaucracy of healthcare and probate after their father passed. They saw a liability. "So we've come up with a solution," Sarah said, her voice softening into a gentle coo that set my teeth on edge. "It's to protect you, to give you peace of mind." Mark slid a document across the coffee table. "We've opened a new checking account in your name, which we will co-sign. Your pension and Social Security will be direct deposited there. We'll take care of all your bills automatically, the mortgage, the utilities, the insurance. You won't have to worry about a thing." He smiled, a thin, triumphant slash. "And," he continued, "we're going to hold on to your credit cards for you, just for safekeeping." The room spun for a moment. They were taking my money, all of it. "And what am I supposed to use for living?" I asked, my voice a whisper. Sarah beamed, as if she were about to present me with a winning lottery ticket. "We're going to give you an allowance. We'll transfer $50 to your debit card every Monday morning for groceries, coffee, or whatever little things you might need. $50. A week." They weren't giving me peace of mind. They were putting me in a cage. My initial shock curdled into a cold, hard knot of anger in the pit of my stomach. I looked at my children, at their earnest, patronizing faces, and I didn't say a word. I just nodded slowly, the image of a defeated old woman. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a war they didn't even know I was capable of fighting. The following Tuesday was my regular grocery day. The initial shock of the intervention had worn off, replaced by a simmering, methodical rage. I walked into the bright, sterile aisles of the supermarket feeling like a ghost. My usual routine felt alien. I would normally pick up a nice cut of salmon, a small bottle of good olive oil, maybe a wedge of imported brie as a treat. Today, my hand hovered over these items and retreated as if burned. I could hear Mark's voice in my head. "Is that a sustainable choice, Mom?" I found myself doing mental arithmetic with every item I placed in the cart. A carton of eggs, a loaf of store-brand bread, a sad-looking head of iceberg lettuce. The cart, usually half full, looked cavernous and empty. My world had shrunk to the size of a $50 bill. The real test came at the checkout. I loaded my meager purchases onto the conveyor belt, my cheeks burning with a shame I hadn't felt since I was a child who'd dropped a jar of pickles in the middle of an aisle. The total came to $54.87. I had miscalculated. The cashier, a young girl with kind eyes and a name tag that read Chloe, smiled at me. "That'll be $54.87, ma'am." I slid the new debit card, the one my children had so graciously provided, into the chip reader. I held my breath. A few seconds ticked by, and then the screen flashed a bright, brutal red. Declined. My heart plummeted into my stomach. "Oh," Chloe said, her smile faltering. "It looks like it didn't go through. Do you want to try it again?" I knew trying it again was pointless. The account held exactly $50, not a penny more. The man behind me in line huffed impatiently, shifting his weight. I could feel his stare, and the stares of others, boring into the back of my head. I was that person now, the old lady holding up the line, fumbling with her finances. I'm so sorry," I stammered, my voice trembling. "I must have left my other card at home. Can you please take something off?" Chloe's expression shifted from confusion to a deep, painful-to-witness pity. "Of course," she said softly. "What would you like to remove?" I looked at my small pile of groceries. What could I possibly sacrifice? The coffee? The small container of yogurt? I felt tears pricking at the back of my eyes. The orange juice," I said, pointing to the carton. It was $5.99. She voided the item. I ran the card again. This time it was approved. I hastily packed my bags, avoiding Chloe's compassionate gaze, and fled the store. Walking home, the thin plastic handles of the grocery bags cutting into my fingers, the humiliation was a physical weight. My children had not just taken my financial independence, they had stolen my dignity. They had reduced me to a caricature, the incompetent senior who couldn't be trusted with her own money. Every step I took on the pavement was fueled by a fresh wave of fury. They thought they were protecting me, but they were erasing me. They saw me as finished, a relic to be managed and maintained until I conveniently expired. As I unlocked my front door and stepped back into the silence of my home, the house they thought was my whole world, I made a vow. They thought I was too old to learn, too frail to fight back, too technologically illiterate to function in the modern world. I was about to prove just how wrong they were. The war had officially begun, and my first order of business was to find a new weapon, one they would never see coming. The days that followed were a gray miasma of forced frugality and quiet resentment. My life, once filled with small, self-directed joys, was now governed by a humiliating weekly countdown. The $50 allowance was a constant, tangible reminder of my children's lack of faith in me. I spent my evenings in my late husband's worn leather recliner, the television flickering with meaningless light, feeling my world contract. It was during one of these aimless nights, scrolling through channels, that the spark ignited. I landed on a 24-hour business news network. A man with slicked-back hair and an expensive suit was excitedly discussing the rise of the retail investor. He spoke of ordinary people, teachers, plumbers, retirees, using online platforms to trade stocks from their living rooms. "The barrier to entry has never been lower," he boomed. "Financial empowerment is at your fingertips." I almost changed the channel. The world of finance had always seemed like an exclusive club for men like Mark, a world of jargon and smoke-filled rooms that was intentionally opaque. It was their world, not mine. But then, the man said something that snagged my attention. He was interviewing a woman, a retired nurse from Ohio, who had started with a few $100s and, through careful research, had built a portfolio that now supplemented her pension significantly. She wasn't a gambler. She was a strategist. She spoke about doing her due diligence and investing in what she knew. A flicker of an idea, fragile and audacious, began to form in my mind. What did my children underestimate most about me? My intellect, my patience, my ability to learn. They saw my struggle with the new smart TV remote as proof of my senility, not as a simple unfamiliarity with poor design. My old laptop, a clunky Dell that took 5 minutes to boot up, sat on a desk in the spare bedroom, mostly used for emails and looking up knitting patterns. I walked into the room and lifted the lid. The fan whirred to life with a groan. I opened the internet browser and typed the words the man on TV had used: how to start day trading. The screen filled with a dizzying array of links, ads, and videos. There were fast-talking 20-somethings promising to make me a millionaire overnight, and serious-looking analysts offering expensive courses. It was overwhelming. But I was a librarian. My entire professional life had been dedicated to navigating overwhelming amounts of information and finding the valuable threads within the noise. This was just a different kind of card catalog. I ignored the get-rich-quick schemes and focused on the educational resources: Investopedia, the Khan Academy, free tutorials on YouTube that explained the absolute basics. What is a stock? What is an ETF? What's the difference between a bull and a bear market? I felt a thrill I hadn't felt in years. It was the thrill of discovery, of a new, complex world opening up to me. My children thought they had locked me in a small, safe room with a $50 a week leash. They had no idea that I had just found a key. I had a secret weapon they didn't know about. A savings account at a small credit union they had forgotten existed. It held nearly $10,000, money I had meticulously saved from side jobs and birthday checks over decades, my rainy day fund. A storm was here, just not the one I had prepared for. I wasn't going to use it to fix a leaky roof. I was going to use it to build a financial fortress, brick by secret brick. That night, I didn't sleep in the recliner. I sat at that old desk until the sun came up, the blue light of the monitor illuminating my face, taking notes in a spiral-bound notebook. I was no longer Helen, the frail mother. I was becoming a student of the market. My days transformed. Outwardly, I maintained the facade my children expected. I spoke to them on the phone, dutifully reporting that I was staying within my budget and thanking them for their help. I would listen to Sarah's stories about her stressful job in marketing and Mark's complaints about the rising cost of living in his trendy apartment complex, all while a secret world buzzed away on my old Dell laptop. The spare bedroom became my university and my command center. I learned the language of the market: PE ratios, moving averages, resistance levels, and candlestick charts went from being gibberish to tools. I filled notebooks with definitions, strategies, and observations. I discovered that my librarian skills were surprisingly transferable. The meticulous research, the cross-referencing of sources, the patience to sift through dry, dense reports, it was all second nature to me. I wasn't gambling, I was studying. I followed specific sectors that I understood. I'd spent decades buying household goods, so I researched companies like Procter & Gamble. I'd seen the rise of technology, so I read the quarterly reports of Apple and Microsoft. I paid attention to pharmaceutical companies, remembering the buzz around new drugs from my friends in the medical field. After 3 weeks of intensive caffeine-fueled study, I was ready. I chose a well-known, low-fee online brokerage firm and began the process of opening an account. It was surprisingly straightforward. I transferred $5,000 from my secret credit union account. Seeing that number appear in my trading account was terrifying and exhilarating. This was real. My first move was conservative. I bought a few shares of a broad market index fund ETF, the kind of set-it-and-forget-it investment that financial advisors love. It was my training wheels. I watched it go up by a few dollars one day and down by a few the next. It taught me to stomach the market's minor convulsions without panicking. But my goal wasn't just to keep pace with the market. My goal was to obliterate my children's perception of me. That required more active participation. I started making small, calculated trades. I read that a major coffee chain was expected to post record earnings. It seemed like a safe bet. I invested a few $100s. The earnings report came out, the stock jumped 7%, and I sold. My profit was a modest $42. It wasn't life-changing money, but it was more profound than that. It was proof. I had taken information, formed a hypothesis, acted on it, and been proven correct. I had generated money completely outside the system my children had imposed on me. That $42 felt more valuable than any $50 allowance they could ever give me. I became disciplined. I set strict rules for myself. Never invest more than 5% of my portfolio in a single stock, Always set a stop loss to protect against major downturns, and never ever trade on emotion. My children's emotional, condescending intervention had ironically forged me into a cold, rational investor. The portfolio began to grow, slowly at first, then with more momentum. A successful trade on a retail giant that beat holiday sales expectations. A smart play on a biotech firm that received FDA approval for a new treatment. My initial $5,000 became $7,000, then $10,000, matching my initial deposit. I transferred the other half of my secret savings into the account. The game was getting bigger and my confidence was soaring. I was living a double life. To my family, I was poor, quiet Helen, living on a pittance. In my secret world, I was a silent, methodical shark, navigating the complex currents of the global economy. And I was just getting started. The contrast between my two lives became a source of dark, private amusement. One afternoon, I was tracking the pre-market indicators for a tech company that was rumored to be unveiling a new piece of hardware. I had done my research for days, reading tech blogs, analyzing supply chain reports, and even watching videos of industry insiders speculating on the announcement. I had a strong feeling the market was underestimating the potential impact. I had $15,000 in my portfolio, and I decided to risk a third of it on this one play. My heart was pounding as I placed the buy order minutes before the market opened. It was the biggest, most aggressive move I had made yet. Just as the opening bell rang on Wall Street, my phone rang. It was Sarah. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice bright and a little too loud. "Just doing my weekly check-in. How are things? Is the $50 lasting you okay? I know things are expensive." I swiveled my chair to face the window, away from the laptop screen where green numbers were starting to cascade upwards as the stock surged. "Oh, hello, dear," I said, my voice the epitome of calm, elderly sweetness. "Everything is just fine. I made a lovely lentil soup that should last me a few days." "Oh, that's great, Mom. See? We knew you could make it work if you were just a little more careful," she said, her tone oozing with self-satisfaction. "Mark and I were just talking about how much more secure your situation is now. No more frivolous spending on, expensive wools and things." On my screen, my initial $5,000 investment had just gained over $800 in the first 10 minutes of trading. I felt a laugh bubbling up inside me, a hysterical, joyous laugh that I had to suppress into a small cough. "Yes, dear, it's certainly secure," I managed to say. "So glad you're happy, Mom," she continued, completely oblivious. "Listen, I have to run to a meeting, but I was thinking, maybe next month I can take you out to lunch. My treat, of course. We can go to that little cafe you like." Her treat. The offer, which once would have been a kind gesture, now felt like a pittance thrown to a beggar. It was an assertion of her power, her control over the poor old dear who couldn't afford her own lunch. I watched as my stock's value ticked past $1,000 in profit. "That's a lovely thought, Sarah, but let's see," I said, a new steely confidence blooming within me. "My schedule has been surprisingly busy lately." There was a brief pause on her end. Busy? Doing what? The question wasn't accusatory, just genuinely confused. What could her shut-in mother possibly be busy with? Knitting? Watching game shows? "Oh, I said vaguely, a smile spreading across my face as I clicked the sell button, locking in a profit of $1,243 before noon. "Projects. Reading. You'd be surprised." I ended the call, promising to try to keep my calendar open. I leaned back in my chair and looked at my portfolio balance, $16,243. I had made more money in 15 minutes than my children allowed me in 6 months. They thought they were my guardians, my protectors. The truth was, they were children playing with Monopoly money, completely clueless that I was now sitting at the real table, in the real game. The power hadn't just shifted. It had undergone a tectonic upheaval. And the next earthquake was going to be one they would feel all the way in their overpriced apartment. For the next few months, I was no longer just a student. I was a predator. My portfolio grew steadily, crossing the $25,000 mark, then $50,000. My small, calculated wins compounded, creating a formidable financial base. I had proven my strategy worked on a small scale. Now, I was waiting for an opportunity to prove it on a grand one. That opportunity arrived on a grim Tuesday in October. A mid-level tech firm, SyncCore, which specialized in data security for cloud computing, had been hit with a bombshell. A respected journalist had published a scathing report alleging a critical flaw in their flagship encryption software. Wall Street reacted with predictable, herd-like panic. In a single morning, SyncCore's stock plummeted by over 60%. The financial news channels were a cacophony of doom, with analysts predicting bankruptcy and calling the stock radioactive. Mark and Sarah's faces swam in my mind. This is what they thought of me, a flawed entity, a bad investment, something whose value had plummeted. But I, the librarian, did what I do best. I didn't listen to the noise. I went to the source. I spent the entire day not watching the stock price, but reading. I pulled up SyncCore's technical white papers. I read through the patents for their encryption algorithm. I even dug up the PhD dissertations of their lead engineers. My mind, trained to find patterns and inconsistencies, found one. The journalist's report was based on a misunderstanding of the software's architecture. The flaw, they described, was in fact a feature. A deliberate backdoor accessible only with a quantum computing key that was, for all practical purposes, unhackable by current technology. The company had explained this in their own documentation, but it was buried in dense technical language that the journalist, and clearly the entire market, had failed to comprehend. They had sold off a diamond because someone told them it was a piece of glass. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't just an opportunity, it was the opportunity. It was a blatant market overreaction based on poor research. I looked at my portfolio, which now stood at a healthy $58,000. My own rules screamed at me not to put all my eggs in one basket, but my gut, now honed by months of experience and backed by solid research, told me this was the time to break the rules. This was the moment that would define my victory. With a hand that trembled only slightly, I began to buy. I liquidated my other positions and poured every single dollar of my $58,000 into the bloodbath that was SyncCore stock. I bought it at rock bottom, a price it hadn't seen since it was a garage startup. For 48 agonizing hours, nothing happened. The stock flatlined. I barely ate. I barely slept. I sat in front of my laptop, watching the static line, questioning if my confidence had tipped into hubris. Had I made a terrible, irreversible mistake? Had I become the financially incompetent person my children believed me to be? On Thursday morning, it happened. SyncCore released an official press statement. It was a masterpiece of corporate communication, calm, clear, and devastatingly precise. It explained the technology in layman's terms, directly refuting the journalist's report with verifiable data and inviting any third-party expert to test their claims. The market's reaction was instantaneous and violent. The stock didn't just rebound, it exploded. It rocketed past its original price as hedge funds and institutional investors who had done their own panicked selling scrambled to buy back in, realizing their colossal error. I watched frozen as the numbers on my screen turned into a blur. My $58,000 investment became $100,000, then $200,000. By the time the market closed, the stock had stabilized at a price that represented a 450% gain. My portfolio balance read $319,000. I stared at the number, not with glee, but with a profound, earth-shaking sense of vindication. I hadn't just made money. I had beaten them all at their own game. I had out-researched the journalists, outmaneuvered the analysts, and outwitted the market. Now, it was time to turn my attention from the market to a much smaller, more personal acquisition. With over $250,000 at my command, the world looked different. The $50 weekly allowance from my children, which still dutifully appeared in my managed account every Monday, was no longer an insult. It was a joke. A hilarious, pathetic little punchline in the grand comedy of their ignorance. But my victory felt incomplete. It was a secret, known only to me and my whirring Dell laptop. Revenge, I decided, is a dish best served not cold, but legally and with official letterhead. My objective was no longer just wealth. It was a specific, targeted application of that wealth. I began to browse commercial real estate listings online, initially as a form of fantasy. I could buy a small storefront, a block of garages, a condo in Florida, but none of it felt right. None of it closed the loop. And then I saw it. It was a listing for a mid-sized, pre-war brick apartment building. 32 units, fully occupied, stable rent roll. The name of the building was the Chestnut Arms. My breath caught in my throat. The Chestnut Arms was where Mark lived in apartment 4B. It was also where Sarah and her husband lived, in 3A. They had moved in 2 years ago, loving the vintage charm and the convenient location. They often complained about the landlord, a faceless corporation that was slow to make repairs and raised the rent like clockwork every year. The plan unfolded in my mind, perfectly formed and gleaming with poetic justice. I wouldn't just be financially independent. I would be their landlord. The very roof over their heads would be a testament to the mother they had so profoundly underestimated. I contacted a high-end commercial real estate broker, a woman named Miss Albright, who sounded sharp and discreet over the phone. I explained that I was a private investor looking to make a cash purchase through a limited liability company, or LLC. She didn't ask personal questions, she only cared about the proof of funds, which I readily provided. "What name would you like for the LLC?" she asked. I smiled. "H. Sterling Properties," I said. H for Helen. And Sterling for my late husband, Robert Sterling. It felt right, as if he were in on this with me, sharing in the magnificent absurdity of it all. The process was a whirlwind of paperwork, due diligence, and legal jargon, but I navigated it with the same focus I applied to my trading. I read every line of the inspection reports, I analyzed the building's financials, and I directed Miss Albright with a clarity that left her audibly impressed. The sellers, a large investment trust, were happy to make a quick, clean, all-cash deal. Within a month, it was done. The closing happened remotely. I sat in my quiet living room, the same room where I had been stripped of my autonomy, and signed the final documents on a tablet Miss Albright had couriered over. A multi-million-dollar property was now mine, or rather, it belonged to H. Sterling Properties, LLC. My secret was secure behind a corporate veil. A week later, a formal letter, drafted by my new property management company, was sent to all tenants of the Chestnut Arms. It was a standard introductory notice, informing them that the building was under new ownership and providing updated contact information for maintenance requests and the address where future rent checks should be mailed. I imagined Mark and Sarah receiving the letter. I saw them glancing at the new company name, H. Sterling Properties, and tossing it onto their counter without a second thought. Just another piece of junk mail from their anonymous new landlord. The stage was set. The characters were in place. All that was left was the final act. I waited 2 weeks for the news to settle. Then I scheduled a video call. "Just a family check-in," I wrote in the email, using their own chillingly cheerful phrase. When their faces popped up on my screen, they looked relaxed, even a little smug. Mark was in his apartment, the familiar brick of the Chestnut Arms visible through his window. Sarah was in hers, a different angle of the same building behind her. "Hi, Mom," Mark started, leaning into his camera. "Good to see you. Everything okay? We were just looking over your account for this month, and it looks like you've been doing a great job. You even have a few dollars left over from last week." Sarah nodded enthusiastically. "We're so proud of you, Mom. We knew you just needed a little structure. By the way, did we tell you? Our building got sold. The new owners seemed just as corporate as the last ones. Sent a form letter and everything." I listened, letting them have their moment. I let them patronize me one last time. Let them pat me on the head from miles away through a camera lens. I let the silence hang for a moment after they finished, a silence that slowly grew from comfortable to awkward. "That's wonderful, kids," I said finally, my voice dangerously calm. "I'm glad you're proud. And you're right. I have been learning to be more structured with my finances. In fact, I've picked up a new hobby." I clicked the share screen button. The first thing that appeared on their screens was the dashboard of my brokerage account. The number sat there, big and undeniable, $321,458.22. Mark squinted. "What is that? Is that some kind of game?" In a way, I said. It's a game I started playing about 6 months ago. It's called day trading. The color drained from Mark's face. Sarah's jaw went slack, her mouth opening and closing silently like a fish. You… What? Mark stammered. Where did you get that money? Did you sell the house? Oh no, I said sweetly. I still own the house. That's just my liquid portfolio. I started with that little bit of rainy day money you two forgot I had. I find that if you do your research properly, the returns can be quite substantial. I didn't give them time to process. I closed the brokerage window and pulled up another document, the deed of sale for their apartment building. They stared at the screen. Their eyes scanned the legal text until they landed on the buyer's name. H. Sterling Properties, LLC. Sarah looked utterly bewildered. H. Sterling Properties? That's the name from the letter. That's our new landlord. Yes, I said, leaning forward and looking directly into my camera, making sure they could see the smile that was finally spreading across my face. H is for Helen. Sterling was your father's last name. I thought it had a nice ring to it. The silence that followed was the most satisfying sound I have ever heard. It was a silence born of pure, unadulterated shock. The entire architecture of their understanding of me, of our relationship, of their own place in the world, had been demolished in an instant. They were no longer my benevolent caretakers. They were my tenants. Mark, the financial consultant, looked like his brain had short-circuited. Sarah was pale, her eyes wide with a dawning horror, and perhaps for the first time, a sliver of respect. So, I said, bringing the meeting to a close in the same way Mark had concluded our intervention, I'm so glad we had this little chat. It's good to keep things transparent in a family. And just as a friendly reminder, rent is due on the 1st of the month. Please don't be late. I ended the video call, leaving them to stare at their own stunned faces on their screens, sitting in apartments that I, their dotty, incompetent old mother, now owned. I leaned back in my chair, in my quiet living room, and for the first time in a long time, I felt completely, utterly, and financially free.